On the 2nd of December 2010, FIFA President Sepp Blatter stood on a stage in Zurich holding an envelope with the eyes of the world on him. Despite being a consummate showman, he looked oddly nervous as he fumbled for the card inside. He pulled it out and announced the host of the 2022 World Cup finals, a race that had been viciously competitive, embroiled in corruption allegations, and dominated by realpolitik. Qatar. Earlier in the day, Russia had been announced as the host of the 2018 World Cup finals, beating England's bid. It was a decision that had been of importance at the highest level. A 2014 British parliamentary report later outlined how an investigative research company formed by an ex-MI6 agent, later named as Christopher Steele, had been keeping tabs on the Russian delegation on behalf of the failed England bid, paying special attention to Roman Abramovich, who they believed had a key role in winning the bid. An ex-MI6 source, believed to be Steele, later told the Sunday Times, "When Abramovich turned up in South Africa and started glad-handing people, that was a turning point." Steele later went into hiding after being outed as the author of a salacious raw intelligence dossier detailing the connections between Russia and the future US President Donald Trump. Bonita Messiades, a member of the failed rival Australian 2022 bid, recounted to the BBC World Service just how seriously everything was being taken. The intelligence agencies that were there said it was really noticeable when the Russians turned up, because no one could hear or see anything. The Russians, she explained, had jammed everyone else's devices. Now, Russia was yet to become the international pariah that it is today, so it was Qatar's announcement that caused bafflement and jubilation in the crowd. The Qatari royal family embraced. Emir Thani, dressed in a suit, took to the stage and Sepp Blatter handed him the World Cup. But around the world there was disbelief. How on earth did Qatar win? The entire bidding process for both the 2018 and 2022 finals were mired by allegations of corruption from the start. Accusations that both the Russian and Qatari bids strenuously deny to this day. Even before the vote, two members of FIFA's executive committee, the 24-person body that would ultimately decide the winner, had been suspended. Nigeria's Amos Adamu and Tahiti's Renal Tamari had been the target of a Sunday Times undercover sting. Journalists posing as a fake consultancy filmed the pair agreeing to vote for the US bid in exchange for millions of dollars to fund personal football projects. Both deny the allegations. And there was also the controversial figure of Mohammed bin Hammam, the Qatari president of the Asian Football Confederation, one of football's most powerful men. He was rumoured to have played an important behind-the-scenes role in lining up support for the bid. In the immediate aftermath of the 2010 vote, FIFA President Sepp Blatter was challenged for the job by bin Hammam. And he was close to dethroning Blatter too. But then he was destroyed by allegations that he had approved bribes in return for votes. FIFA banned him from football-related activities for life. He appealed and won a reprieve from the Court of Arbitration for Sport, and although he's always denied any wrongdoing, he quit football and returned to Qatar to tend to his family's engineering firm. The ban was reinstated 6 months later after a FIFA Ethics Committee investigation found bin Hammam guilty on a separate charge of breaching FIFA's ethics code with regards to conflicts of interest between his job as AFC president and as a member of FIFA's executive committee. But most intriguing of all was Qatargate. After Qatar won the right to host the World Cup, the Qatar Investment Authority went on to buy PSG. And 6 months after the 2022 vote, Al Jazeera Sports agreed a TV rights deal with the French League worth €450 million over 5 seasons. A France football investigation alleged that UEFA President Michel Platini had been asked to vote for Qatar by then French President Nicolas Sarkozy. It was alleged that the president had hosted a secret lunch at the Elysee Palace for the Crown Prince of Qatar, Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, and Michel Platini. At the lunch, it was alleged that the Qatari delegation offered to buy PSG, the team Sarkozy supported, clear its debt, and spin off a new sports TV network from Al Jazeera, what would become known as beIN Sports, to buy French televised football rights. Sepp Blatter, later in 2015, told the Financial Times that Platini and the rest of the FIFA Executive Committee had a gentleman's agreement that the US should win the bid. Just 1 week before the election, I got a phone call from Michel Platini and he said, I am no longer in the picture because I've been told by the head of state that we should consider the situation in France, he said. Qatar has always rejected any suggestion that they won the bid improperly. Then Platini responded forcefully, saying, "To say that my choice was part of a deal between the French state and Qatar is pure speculation and lies," he said. "I do not rule out legal action against anyone who casts doubt on the honesty of my vote." Sarkozy has never publicly commented, but it's also believed that he denies the allegations. So given all of the controversy about the two decisions, FIFA was forced to commission an investigation. Former US Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Michael J. Garcia, was put in charge, and 2 years later he delivered what became known as the Garcia Report. FIFA at first refused to release it, except for a heavily truncated executive summary which exonerated Qatar and Russia. But Garcia resigned, saying that his work was being misinterpreted. Still, the Garcia Report and a subsequent US Justice Department investigation did help to uncover decades of historic allegations of corruption. Of the 24 FIFA Executive Committee members in place in the run-up to the 2010 vote, 9, Blatter, Bin Hammam, Platini, Tamari, and Adamu, along with Jack Warner, Ricardo Texeira, Chung Mon-jun, and Rafael Salguero, had bans from football upheld for a variety of offences that later came to light after the vote, some related to the vote itself and others for historical allegations of corruption. For example, Michel Platini was later banned from football by FIFA for 4 years over an unconnected $2 million payment he received from Blatter in 2011, around the time Platini was considering challenging Blatter for the FIFA presidency. Both men claimed the payment was for work that Platini had undertaken years earlier and was still owed for. Blatter was also banned from football over that payment. In 2019, Platini was questioned by the French authorities over Qatar 2022. He denies any wrongdoing. Their investigation into allegations of corruption surrounding the bid remains ongoing. 2 more, Julio Grondona and Nicolas Leoz, were accused of corruption but have since died. Chuck Blazer, the larger-than-life former US soccer executive who famously had 2 apartments in Trump Towers, one for him, one for his cats, and who would travel around his New York neighborhood on a mobility scooter with a pet parrot on his shoulder, was swept up in a US federal investigation. He was charged with tax evasion and later turned state's witness, admitting that he'd conspired with other EXCO members to accept bribes in relation to previous World Cup bids. He died in 2017. 7 more were later cleared of allegations of corruption. And a further, but separate 3, John Giogora, Jeff Thompson, and Senez Erzik, later retired. Hani Aborida is still at FIFA, as is Michel Dugue, who was cleared of any wrongdoing around the 2010 vote by the FIFA Ethics Committee over a small painting gifted to him by the Russia 2018 bid, and the fact that his son was secured a job in Qatar after the vote. It was also true that the bidding for the World Cup had been long problematic. Corruption allegations surrounded the successful bids of both the 2006 World Cup bid in Germany and South Africa 2010. Franz Beckenbauer was accused of bribery allegations surrounding Germany's 2006 World Cup bid, which he denied. A Swiss trial ended in 2020 without a verdict after Switzerland's 15 years statute of limitations expired. And Qatar played the marketing game better than the rest. Take one weapon in their arsenal, Aspire, which 5 years earlier had been opened by Pelé and Maradona. In a few years, Qatar had opened numerous academies around the globe under its Football Dreams program, looking to identify and recruit talent in previously overlooked or underdeveloped footballing nations. 6 of the 15 Football Dreams programs were in countries that were represented on FIFA's EXCO. Qatar has always denied that the 2 issues were connected in any way. Whilst the US and England were bragging to the world about their stadiums and their technically sound bids, Qatar's was the only one deemed high risk by FIFA, in part due to the dangerous 50-degree summer heat. Qatar was working under the radar, funding what it viewed as a humanitarian project in the backyards of the men who would actually vote on the World Cup bids. They could also count on high-profile World Cup ambassadors like Zinedine Zidane and Pep Guardiola, amongst others. And there was high politics too. In 2015, the Sunday Times alleged that the intelligence gathered by the England bid had raised suspicions that a huge gas deal struck between Qatar and Russia may have been part of a World Cup vote swap deal. Another huge gas trade was also struck with Paraguay. Of course, it could all be a coincidence, and all three countries deny that the World Cup bid and the gas deals were connected. In December 2010, Qatar was victorious. The victors believed the noise around the bid would subside and would be long forgotten by the time they hosted the finals 12 years later. But then an unexpected event in North Africa turned everything on its head. On the 17th of December, 15 days after Sepp Blatter had stood in front of the cameras clutching their envelope, 26-year-old Mohamed Bouazizi set himself on fire in Sidi Bouzid, a city in the centre of Tunisia. Bouazizi was a vegetable seller who was regularly harassed by government officials looking for bribes. One day his cart was overturned and his electronic scales impounded. After petitioning the governor to get his scales back and not getting an answer, he poured a bottle of paint thinner over his head and set himself alight. Burns covered 90% of his body. He died 2 weeks later. But protests had already begun, first in Sidi Bouzid and then Tunis. Mohamed Bouazizi's self-immolation sparked a wave of protests known as the Arab Spring, which spread across the Middle East, throwing long-time autocrats from power. In Egypt, the long-time dictator Hosni Mubarak was removed from power after hundreds of thousands of people filled Tahrir Square. After Egypt's first free elections, Mohamed Morsi became president, a candidate aligned with the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood are a popular Islamist organization banned in much of the Middle East for posing the biggest threat to the Gulf's conservative, autocratic monarchies. The Arab Spring terrified the highly repressive Gulf Arab states, especially Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Bahrain, who all feared that they would be next. But not Qatar. You see, after more than a century of mediation, surviving between major regional superpowers, and the then Crown Prince observing firsthand how Saddam Hussein had waltzed into Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, Qatar had managed to balance an independent foreign policy. They broadly supported the Arab Spring uprisings, as well as Islamist groups like the Muslim Brotherhood. The Taliban and Hamas were also hosted in Doha. Qatar also enjoyed relatively good relations with Israel, and crucially, Iran, who they shared a huge gas field with. Although Iran is also seen as an existential threat to Qatar's neighbours, much like the Muslim Brotherhood was. And at the same time, the El Udeid Air Base was now the home to US Central Command in the region, guaranteeing Qatar's safety, militarily at least. So Qatar found itself in opposition to the Saudis and the UAE. The country had loaned billions of dollars to prop up the Morsi government in Egypt. When Morsi was eventually removed from power in a military coup in 2013, the UAE and Saudi Arabia promised upwards of $12 billion of aid to support Abdel Fattah el-Sisi's new anti-Muslim Brotherhood regime. The two sides essentially had been at war via their various proxies in Syria and later Libya for years. But what really antagonized Qatar's neighbors was Al Jazeera, which gave airtime to the dissidents who openly criticized the policies of Saudi and Emirati leaders whilst refraining to criticize the Qatari royal family who bankrolled it. They accused Qatar of using Al Jazeera to agitate opposition in their own backyards. Tensions between Qatar and its neighbors were so bad that Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, and Egypt briefly withdrew their ambassadors from Doha in 2014. And at the same time, a once-in-a-generation change in power was taking place, elevating three crown princes. Since the 2008 global financial crisis and then the Arab Spring, Mohammed bin Zayed had turned the UAE into one of the world's most pervasive security states with a hawkish interventionist foreign policy. In 2013, Qatar's Emir Hamad abdicated and peacefully transferred power to his young son Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani. And in Saudi Arabia in 2015, Salman bin Abdulaziz bin Saud became king. His son, Mohammed bin Salman, became defense minister and deputy crown prince in 2015. He wouldn't be happy with that position for long. But perhaps the most consequential development was taking place thousands of miles away in the US, where, in November 2016, Donald J. Trump had just won the US presidential elections. The Saudis and the UAE had been supportive of a Trump presidency after becoming enraged with President Barack Obama's nuclear deal with Iran. Trump had been invited to Riyadh for his first foreign trip as president. He was received like a king and charmed by Mohammed bin Salman, giving the world the iconic image of Trump Sisi and King Salman all touching a mysterious glowing orb. The Saudis convinced him that Qatar was the bad guy. If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel.